this wasn't just a war fought in trenches and mud. It wasn't only soldiers charging through barbed wire or artillery thundering over the horizon. World War I was also a financial war waged through gold, bonds, and the hidden decisions of bankers who never saw a battlefield. The soldiers fought with rifles. The governments fought with balance sheets. And what those governments did during those years didn't just decide who won or lost. It rewired the entire global financial system, a system that still shapes your money today. If you think war is just about politics and armies, think again. The First World War proved that money is the most powerful weapon ever created. In 1914, Europe was already on edge. Rival empires, colonial ambitions, and alliances had turned the continent into a powder keg. But behind all the talk of honor and empire was a quieter truth. War costs money, more money than any nation actually had. When leaders chose war, they were also choosing debt. Each empire marching to battle was marching its people toward an economic abyss. At first, the major powers believed the war would be short, over by Christmas. They thought they could fund it with gold reserves, short-term loans, and patriotic donations. But that illusion evaporated in weeks. The war was eating through national treasuries faster than anyone imagined. At the time, Europe still ran on the gold standard, meaning paper money could be traded for actual gold. It gave currencies credibility, but it also chained governments to a fixed supply of wealth. You couldn't just print endlessly without breaking trust. But once the war began, trust collapsed anyway. Germany, France, and Britain were spending millions every day. Germany alone was burning through 10 million marks daily by late 1914. Britain's costs soon reached £2.5 million every single day. The math was brutal. The gold wouldn't last. So one by one, nations quietly abandoned the gold standard, cutting their currencies loose from real metal and turning them into government promises. That single decision changed the modern world. It proved that money didn't need to be backed by gold, only by belief. Once governments discovered they could print without limit, they never looked back. The financial war had begun. Germany, cut off from global markets by the Allied blockade, relied entirely on its own citizens. The government launched massive war loan campaigns, urging people to pour their savings into bonds that would supposedly be repaid after victory. The propaganda was everywhere. Heroic posters, patriotic songs, families told it was their duty to lend to the fatherland. In total, Germany raised over 100 billion marks this way. But when defeat came, those bonds were worthless. Millions lost everything. That economic betrayal would later fuel the anger that extremist movements fed upon. Britain took a different path. London was still the financial capital of the world, with deep global networks of credit. At first, the government sold short-term war bonds and appealed to patriotism. But soon, it reached out across the Atlantic. Even while America was still neutral, J.P. Morgan and Co. became Britain's banker, arranging huge loans and managing arms purchases. By the time the US officially joined the war in 1917, Wall Street had already been bankrolling the Allies for years. This was not charity, it was power. America earned millions in fees and emerged from the war as a new financial superpower. The US went from a debtor nation to the world's largest creditor, and the 20th century became the American century. France faced its own financial crisis. It leaned on domestic savers and foreign loans, especially from the United States. But dependency came at a cost. After the war, the burden of repayment strained France's economy and politics, fueling the tensions that defined the 1920s. And then there was Russia, a financial disaster in slow motion. The empire borrowed heavily from its allies, printed money to cover losses, and watched its currency collapse. By 1917, the ruble was nearly worthless. The Tsar fell, and revolution followed. When you look at the Russian Revolution, don't just see ideology, see financial collapse. By 1918, the numbers were staggering. The Allied nations had spent more than $140 billion. The Central Powers about $60 billion. The result was the end of the old financial world. The gold standard was shattered. Inflation tore through every economy. And the ordinary saver, the worker who bought war bonds or kept savings in cash, was the one who paid the price. The wealthy, meanwhile, shielded themselves. They moved money abroad, invested in tangible assets, and stayed close to power where they could see the crash coming first. In a financial war, the small saver bleeds first. The war didn't just destroy lives, it destroyed financial truth. Governments had learned that they could finance the impossible by detaching money from reality. They could suspend gold, print endlessly, borrow from citizens, and later rewrite the rules when things went bad. Sound familiar? It should. The same playbook has been used in every crisis since, from the Great Depression to 2008. When leaders say, "This is temporary, remember 1914, that's what they said then, to right before currencies collapsed. When the guns went silent in 1918, the battlefield shifted from Europe's fields to its balance sheets. The United States, once a debtor, now held the world's gold. Europe was drowning in debt. Britain owed America over $4 billion. France, more than $3 billion. The war had transferred global financial power from London to Wall Street. But debt itself became the next weapon. To pay their citizens who'd bought war bonds, Britain and France demanded reparations from Germany, a staggering 132 billion gold marks under the Treaty of Versailles. It was economic punishment dressed as justice. Germany couldn't pay. Each attempt, printing money, exporting goods, only made things worse. By 1923, German hyperinflation was so extreme that people carried wheelbarrows of cash just to buy bread. That financial chaos didn't just ruin savings, it fueled rage, desperation, and ultimately dictatorship. Meanwhile, Britain made another blunder. In 1925, it tried to return to the gold standard at its pre-war rate, a move that crippled its economy. Factories closed, unemployment rose, and deflation wrecked working-class lives. It was economic nostalgia pretending to be strength, and it failed completely. The US, meanwhile, flooded Europe with loans in the 1920s so nations could repay each other. Germany paying Britain and France, who paid America. It was a financial merry-go-round that collapsed with the Great Depression. The world had never been so connected or so fragile. The First World War wasn't just a clash of armies, it was the birth of modern finance. It proved that governments could suspend gold, inflate, and borrow endlessly, and still convince citizens it was patriotic. It showed how debt could be disguised as duty and inflation as progress. And it set the pattern we still live under today. When crisis hits, the people in power protect themselves, while ordinary savers are told to do their part. So when you hear that the system is stable, remember 1914. When you're told that inflation is temporary, remember 1923. Money is not real just because it's printed. And stability is not real just because it's promised. The truth of money has always been hidden in the ledgers, and history is the only teacher that doesn't lie. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.